Recorded Books and One-Click Digital present A Doubter's Almanac by Ethan Canin. Narrated by David Aaron Baker. Part 1. Chapter 1. Induction. A Late Arrival. From the kitchen window, Milo Andret watched the bridge over the creek, and when he saw Earl Biederman's white Citroën race across the span, he hurried out the door and picked up a short hoe. Biederman was driving too fast. Reckless was the word for it, but that's the way he'd always been. Arrogant, heedless, lucky to stumble onto the right roads, the right career, the right woman. Lucky even to be alive. For any other driver, the route from the bridge to the cabin would take 5 minutes. Andret figured it would take Biederman 3. Outside under the trees, he crossed as quickly as he could toward the garden, his feet today somehow obeying his commands. Next to the strawberries, he lowered himself into the folding chair and used the coiled hose to dash a few palmfuls of water onto his shirt and hair. The sun was high. He ought to be sweating. He heard the car throw gravel as it made the turn into the driveway. Then the engine shut off. A fan came on the way it did in French cars. Biederman probably loved that fan. One door slam. Andret waited. Then a second. He let them knock at the door to the cabin. His name called, "Professor! Professor!" This was an affectation. Then steps on the cluttered path to the back of the house, where he was bent low over the plants, pulling strenuously at the roots of a marauding false grape. "Professor Andret!" He turned to offer his greeting, squinting, wiping the spigot water from his brow. A shock. Earl Biederman was in a wheelchair. He realized he'd heard something about that. From her, maybe? He couldn't remember. She was here, though. That was the important thing. And now she was guiding her husband in a wheelchair, pushing him in front of her across the bumpy ground like an offering. It could have been awful, but he saw immediately that it wasn't going to be. He also realized with a start that she'd been the one driving. Impossible. Milo Andret grew up in northern Michigan, near Sheboygan, on the western edge of Lake Huron, where the offshore waters were fathomless and dark. The color of the lake there was closer to the stormy Atlantic hues of Lake Superior than to the tranquil, layered turquoise of Lake Michigan, which lapped at the tourist beaches on the far side of the state. Milo's father had been an officer in the Navy during the Second World War, a destroyer's navigator, driven by the hope of one day commanding his own ship. But at the age of 24, after an incident in the Solomon Sea, he'd abandoned his ambitions. The incident had occurred in November 1943, just a year before Milo was born. Coming north out of the straits near Bougainville Island, the destroyer had been hit by a string of Japanese torpedoes, and in the wake of the explosions the ship's life rafts had drifted into unknown waters. Milo's father and another sailor had managed to get aboard one of the rafts, and before nightfall they'd picked up 2 more men. A week later, though, when a British cruiser finally sighted them off of Papua New Guinea, all but Milo's father had been eaten by sharks. By the time Milo was born, his father had been discharged back to Sheboygan, where he'd found work as a science teacher at Near Isle High School. It was a position from which, for the next 39 years, he would neither be offered a promotion nor seek one. Milo's mother had been the first female summa cum laude chemistry major in the history of Michigan State University. But she too was willing to forsake her ambitions. She raised Milo until he...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?